Oh god, the new show just dropped and it slapped. That was crazy. I am blown away in every way possible. Even though I am a fanboy, it's true. I am a critter and Campaign 2 was my favorite. But let's talk about all the differences from Campaign 2 to the Mighty Nein animated series on Prime. Let's go. From the first 3 episodes of the Mighty Nein animated that just came out, starting off with Yasha. She has seen some pretty good changes. When we see Yasha in the Mighty Nein Critical Role Campaign 2, she is a part of the circus with Molly Mock. Although now when we see her, she is no longer part of the circus. And what's more is when the first times we see her, she has a little rune at the back of her neck, which during the times of the first campaign, I believe it is implied that she is not under the effects of that little rune on the back of her neck. At that moment during the beginning of the campaign, it was something in her past that seems as spilled over in the animated series to continue in the beginning of the animated series. So yeah, that's the changes for Yasha so far. We only got a little few clips of Yasha in the first episode, so not too much to say about her yet. Next up, Caleb and Nott. Now, actually, even though we're getting new scenes of Caleb and Nott, which are kind of pre-Session 1 scenes, or Session 0 scenes, as what existed in the Critical Role campaign, as we're seeing now in the Mighty Nein animated series, pretty much nothing has changed for Nott and Caleb. Although we do get these new scenes, they kind of fall mostly in line with what we know happened with Caleb and Nott before the campaign started. I guess maybe the biggest difference being that when Caleb and Nott met, or originally were together, they spent some time in jail together, where they broke out of a jail, which is not pictured in the Mighty Nein animated series. Instead, we see that they are just roving criminals up until the moment that they get to the circus, whereas they had spent time in jail before the circus in the Critical Role campaign. So that's the only difference really I can think of, other than when it comes to the carnival itself, where everything is different during the carnival of Fletching and Moondrop, current traveling carnival of curiosities. Of course, the entire party hasn't really met yet, whereas they have at that point in time in the campaign story versus the animated. So Caleb and Nott's reason for attending the carnival is perhaps the biggest change that we've seen so far. That they are there to get spell components for Caleb, which he had seen through a flyer. We'll get to the changes of the carnival itself pretty soon and talk about that. But in terms of Caleb and Nott, yeah, that's the biggest difference really, is they weren't in prison, and also their reason for going to the carnival is different. It's a nice little touch when we get to see Caleb teaching Nott the message spell, which actually is also in the which actually is also in the live play Critical Role D&D campaign. The message spell is the first spell that Nott ever casts in the campaign as well. So that is a one-to-one moment, just, when they learn it, slightly different, They don't actually really show Caleb teaching Nott the spell, but they show Nott using the spell for the first time, and she references, the way Caleb showed me in the live play D&D campaign. Next up is Fjord and Jester. Man. So the first real difference that I can think of that is referenced in their pre-Session 0 before the beginning of the Critical Role D&D campaign that we see in the animated series is just a small one, but it's referenced that Jester and Fjord meet in Port Tamale rather than Nicodranas, where we see the reasonings for Jester having to leave her home. Of course, Jester's backstory remains the same, with her pulling some pranks on Lord Sharp and her mother's client, that is a powerful figure in the city, that leads her to flee. But Fjord being there for those moments, I believe, is completely new. And yeah, honestly, a much better touch. Like, they're, as far as we hear in the live D&D campaign, their meeting in Port Damali isn't too fleshed out. So adding Fjord into the moments of Jester's backstory, of the moments she has to leave, being the exact moments that Fjord discovers his powers, was absolutely delicious. I loved it, honestly. Perfect. Another decently large change is we see Vandarin with the Sword of Fathoms in Fjord's first scene. Fjord, when he wakes up on the beach and takes the sword, takes it knowingly in the Mighty Nein animated that it was Vandarin's sword. Whereas in the campaign, Fjord just wakes up with the random sword there and feels compelled to grab it. He doesn't know that it was once Vandarin's sword, nor does he know that Vandarin once had a connection to the powers that he now has. So that is also a little expediting change to the story. You know, we kind of find out over time that Vandarin is also linked to the same thing that Fjord is linked to, giving him his powers. But here we can kind of infer it right away. One thing that stays loyal to the campaign as well is Jester's talking to herself and there being no response of the traveler, to make everybody kind of question, is she just a little crazy, you know, with her personality and everything too? Same thing happened in the real live play campaign, so that was it's a nice touch seeing it in animation. It's Jester just talking to herself. I love it. Now time for perhaps the most changed, in my opinion, other than perhaps Molly Mock in a way, Beauregard Lionette. We don't actually see her running away kind of from the Cobalt Soul in the same capacity that she does in the live play D&D campaign. In the live play D&D campaign, she just runs away to kind of live out on her whimsy because she was sick of the same kind of things we see her subject to with Xenoth and the oppressive monks in the Cobalt Soul. She more just runs away to go live her life and be a free soul wanderer. And later on, after all the events we've already seen in the first 3 episodes of the Mighty Nein animated, that is when Dyren first approaches her and offers to train her. What's more is that Dyren just offers to train her and approaches her, and they have no knowledge of the beacon being stolen. It's not her mission to find out information about the beacon. It's not her mission to find this Deadeye guy who knows about the mole and the Cobalt Soul. She doesn't even know about the mole and the Cobalt Soul. Dyren doesn't even know about the mole and the Cobalt Soul. As a matter of fact, I believe in the live play campaign, it is not shown that there is any mole in the Cobalt Soul. So that is a huge change, as well as her very intro scene in the first episode when we see her going to the investigation of Rockguard Garrison or Blade Guard Garrison. I can't remember the name. I think Rockguard. Her going there is a completely new thing as well. Seeing the destruction of the beacon, getting to see Beau's investigation skills put to use, you know, in the new Rumius. I forget his name. The guy she's with, that's a little racist dude. He's a completely new character. So yeah, that all those moments with Beau are very big changes, and honestly nice ones. It's nice to see her, put down the path quite right off the beginning. You know, it was kind of on brand for Beau to, you know, just run off and be living her best life, being a wanderer and shit. You know, because Beau is such a rebel. But it's also on brand for Beau to, of course, actually want to mean something, as she says in the first episode with Dyren. So yeah, with the changes of her investigating with this Deadeye guy and these message stones, it is a lot more intriguing what we're seeing with Beau's story. Beau's story definitely seems like it has, and the new Cobalt Soul mole, there's the most new juice out of anyone other than maybe Yasha yet for what we've seen with Beau's story. So I'm interested to see where exactly they're going to go. Because it kind of felt like, to me, honestly, in the beginning of the live play campaign, when we first see Xenoth, it kind of feels like a little bit to me that Matt and Marisha kind of had different versions of Xenoth in their head. You know, like, I think Matt kind of saw Xenoth as like this guy who got put in a bad position, sort of, and is just trying to do the best of it. And Beau's father's more the bad guy, kind of, in a way. Whereas I think Marisha saw them both kind of as villains. And later on, as the campaign develops, I think they kind of bridge that gap, and they reveal that, yes, Xenoth was doing some fucked up shit and fucked over Beau. Not in the mole way, though, more in what he agreed to participate in with her father. And I think that kind of is a story that kind of morphs and develops kind of over the campaign. It feels like, to me at least, you know, when we first meet Xenoth, he feels like a lot more of a not so treacherous of a character, and perhaps that's just how good abusers hide it on, and perhaps I'm wrong and I'm assuming this incorrectly, and Matt and Marisha were on the same page for Xenoth the whole time, or perhaps they weren't on the same page, but perhaps it just wasn't fully decided what he was until they realized what he was through telling the story over time. But now that they know the story, Xenoth really feels like a lot different of a character. Not just because of the mole kind of aspect, which does not exist in the D&D campaign, but also because of what he participated in with Beau's father. So yeah, with Xenoth and Beau, that is a big change as well. A good one is too. It's kind of feels more precedented. And what's absolutely even crazier more, Beau is the first to see a Volstrucker. She has a fight with a Volstrucker. She gets absolutely bodied by the Volstrucker, and she has this whole like Volstrucker beef with the Volstrucker tracking her and stuff. The one that we know now, I believe, is called Oelia. Yeah, so the plot with Beau and Oelia and their rivalry against each other, completely new. Also absolutely fantastic. None of this happens in the campaign at all. Beau fighting a Volstrucker or nothing like that early on in the campaign, having this rivalry with the Volstrucker, which is absolutely on brand. The Volstrucker are the agents of what she is working against. You know, she's trying to find out who stole the beacon and stuff, which are the Volstruckers, which eventually becomes her overarching main purpose later on, kind of as the campaign develops. But here, by putting the Volstrucker in and putting Beau through the investigation at the Rockguard Garrison, we really kind of start Beau's character trajectory from the start rather than halfway in. And yeah, the fight scenes with the getting to see more Volstrucker fight scenes, especially at the lower levels, kind of, you know, as the beginning of the campaign, we call it the lower D&D levels, where they're a lot more of a scary threat, has been absolutely delicious. We did not see enough Volstrucker moments and fights during the actual campaign. You know, we kind of only actually ever see the Volstruckers in action towards the very, very end, when the party is like absolutely badass, defeated, you know, super natural threats and stopped crazy things from happening. You know, they're like absolute worldly badasses by the time they fight Volstruckers. So the Volstruckers kind of just in the live play campaign don't really seem like as much of a threat because of how much the Mighty Nein have done already and became so powerful. Whereas now we're getting to see the Volstruckers at the beginning, where they are the boogeymen, you know? They are the most badass hitmen in the entire continent of Wildmount and shit. So yeah, that's been with the Beau as kind of the narrative driving action to see more Volstrucker, as well as we're seeing, you know, the bads in their own frames now, which we don't see as player characters. And that brings us to our literal and figurative peacock himself, Molly Mock Tea Leaf. A decent bit of changes we're getting to see with Molly Mock. Of course, the circus itself has been changed greatly. The traveling carnival of curiosities. And Molly's role within it as well. We see here as an MC in this show, whereas previously in the show of the D&D campaign, just Gustav kind of does that role. Gustav Fletchling, the guy with the sabers that he unfortunately is forced to slay, which is also a huge change. So we might as well talk about all the changes of the carnival with Molly Mock here, because really it is his backstory. His role, first of all, in the circus, a huge change. His relationship with Gustav seems to be a lot more important to him as well as him, of course, having to kill Gustav, and the effect that Calorie, the Devil Toad, has on the carnival being much more profound. In the D&D live campaign, only 2 people are turned into the reptilian monsters, and the tent doesn't burn down. It's a lot less of a catastrophic event. It is just the death of 2 rather than how kind of intense it gets in the actual animated show. As well as Gustav dying. Gustav does not die, of course, in the actual campaign. He's arrested later on, right? So, and Gustav being the owner of the scimitars as well, and Molly taking them from him, that is another large kind of sentimental change that intertwines with Gustav's death and Molly's role in it. The card readings are ever so perfect, honestly. I love the way that they did them. The tarot cards. Oh, it was such a fucking juicy moment where Molly is about to step out to go have his moment in the carnival, and right before he goes on stage, he draws a card for himself from the top of the deck. Does a self-reading, and what does he draw? Death. Ah! My God. Fuck. If you're making a tarot deck, like people make these things, right? Why would you make a death card? If you believe in the spiritual powers of tarot and you create the deck, why would you do that? Damn, I don't know. Fuck. Of course, with no Yasha being there anymore, no longer having a link to Yasha in the beginning, that's another kind of minor change. But also kind of feels like a serious change as well, because Yasha and Molly's relationship is relatively important in the later stages of the campaign. And going back and talking about the carnival itself, we learn that the carnival is in dire straits, which is never really talked about before, and they are absolutely in financial issues. And then, of course, the biggest change being Toya and Calorie are not part of the regular carnival's retinue. In the D&D show, they are with the carnival all the time. They're not just a new act that gets brought in. What's more is the character of Toya seems relatively changed as well. Whereas before, she was kind of more... Perhaps she still is depicted as a young girl. I'm not sure. It's kind of tough to tell. But she kind of seems like she's depicted as older here in the animated show. As well as she has this mechanism for controlling the Devil Toad Calorie through these torch bugs, or lumino bugs, I believe they were called. That is completely new and fresh. Whereas in the show, they just had like a talking relationship with Calorie, and they just like thought he was a dude, and it was just a dude putting on an act. That was just a really big ass dude. It's not super obvious that in the show that Calorie is the one that turns the townsfolk and kills the townsfolk and turns them into monsters. It's a mystery in the D&D live play why they turned into these they were more like zombie creatures in the D&D campaign as well, whereas there's like reptilian monsters in the animated show. So we don't really know in the D&D campaign how that happened. It's kind of happens in a moment of everybody being distracted by Toya's singing, and that's kind of a mystery for the first couple episodes that the party, the Mighty Nein, are trying to figure out what happened and why did that guy turn into a zombie. Whereas now it's super clear the toad goes crazy and it's the toad that does it, right? We clearly see the toad, Toya losing control of the toad, which is not even a thing. She never had control of the toad in the D&D show. The toad is just seen as like a conscious entity that is another performing actor. What's more is the carnival itself is much grander in scale in comparison to the D&D campaign. There seems to be much more performing actors and small tents with little games around, and the House of Mirrors. The tent, I believe, is depicted as much larger than what we see in the D&D campaign. Unfortunately, the one thing, although it is this much grander kind of carnival and event that everybody's going around and looking at things, unfortunately, we don't see the other acts that we get to really see in the D&D campaign. We see like a little moment of the Nott sisters, the little snake girls, and Molly saying hi to them. We get a quick moment of Orna, but she's now a trapeze artist rather than a fire drinker, and her act is kind of keyed in with Toya and the Devil Toad. Unfortunately, for me, no Desmond. I like Desmond a lot. The guy who played the fiddle and was dressed up and painted in very ostentatious ways, that comes down like a water drop from a rope falling on, coming upside down with a rope tied around his leg, and flips around on a flip at the beginning. That's playing the fiddle through the whole thing. So while the carnival seems much grander in scale and operations, let's say, like they have more things going on for them other than just a main show, which is what it's depicted as in the D&D campaign, we don't really get as much of the personable touch and delightful descriptions that Matthew gave of the acts from the D&D campaign. Which, I get it. They're kind of doing other things now. We're seeing other stories rather than just watching an exotic D&D carnival. This is a better change overall, but it's a little bit of a shame, honestly. In the first episode of D&D Critical Role Campaign 2, when Matt describes the whole axe and everything in such it's masterful. You have to go watch it if you've not seen Critical Role Campaign 2 Episode 1. Where the show of the carnival is described by Matt. It is amazing. Shame we didn't get to see it in animation, but I understand why. As well as Molly's emceeing role, we see him taking more of like a fatherly role and like a leader role in the carnival as well, or circus. We see him handling people's emotions and day-to-day operations and making sure there isn't fights and everything. He is, of course, a promoter in the regular D&D campaign previously, that's the way actually he meets the party, is by handing out flyers to them and trying to get them to show up. But we see him, taking care of the day-to-day kind of operations and security of the carnival in a different way now, which was a nice touch, It is a beautiful contrast when we see all throughout the entire episode all the chaos and everybody in the carnival being stressed out, and Molly being the voice of reason, the calm, collective, happy, go lucky, but at the same time has solutions to problems. That Molly is, as I'm describing, making sure this guy who's in an emotional wreck, cheering him up to go perform his act properly, dealing with all these problems of like people wanting to start fights, calming Gustav down when Gustav's stressing out. He's just so, everything is grand in a party and blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, we see him having to kill Gustav and him being absolutely devastated. All of a sudden, that entire veneer, that act, that composure, that whimsiness is destroyed, and we see him distraught and devastated, which we never see this. We kind of see a little of his, of course, it's just his personality in general, his whimsy, got everything togetherness is just how his character is all the time. But this sharp contrast of shit hitting the fan, like what happens in the carnival main event with Kylery and everything, it's much more of a tragedy now in the Mighty Nein animated compared to what it was in the D&D show. It was still some sad moments, of course, in the D&D show, right? What ends up happening in the end with the carnival is still, makes you feel bad. And especially everything with Toya really makes you feel more bad, which is a little different now with her kind of being older, it seems like. And her relationship with Kylery seems to be changed. But yeah, honestly, it hits closer to home with Molly having to kill Gustav and their relationship being a little bit more established. Last but certainly not least, we got Hot Boy TM. That's right, Essek Tayless, everybody's favorite. So, actually, it's tough to say because we only hear a little bit about Essek's moments, kind of during this time in the campaign, right? He's not met until much later on, and only things are referenced, right? So all of what is with him is kind of, maybe it's new, but maybe it was already there and we just never explored it in the D&D campaign. It is referenced kind of in the D&D campaign that Essek has family turmoil, you know? I think they talk about his mother a little bit, not necessarily that she's sick, but that he has some sort of troubled relationship with her, and that she and also his brother, if I remember correctly from the D&D campaign, are both very much consumed in the faith of the Luxon. You know, they are believers in the holiness of the Dunamantic beacons, whereas Essek sees them less as we see here in the first episodes, less of the religious beacon and more of an untapped primal power, which he, of course, wants to learn more about, to perhaps in his own mind's altruistic values. You know, it's we're yet to see whether or not it's just out of a wizard's ambition for wanting the thirst for knowledge, or if he truly believes that by studying the beacon, it can help his people and help all the people of the world by advancing magical science, kind of, in a way, right? So yeah, these new moments that we see with Essek and his mother are very juicy and very interesting. That we see has some sort of sickness and seems to be kind of bleeding in between which life she's living in, kind of like the Animus effect, kind of, in a way, you know, if you think about it. Shout out Assassin's Creed. Seeing Essek in these vulnerable moments with his mother and just worried about his mother, maybe that is perhaps why he did what he did and helped Trent Ickathon steal the beacon, right? Perhaps he believes that he can learn something through studying the beacon, which the Bright Queen would never allow, as it was a religious and holy artifact. Through studying that, he can find a way to help cure his mother of her ailments, which seem somewhat beacon related, right? She's not sure what life she's in. She isn't sure what consciousness is going on, right? And the lives, which he's talking about, the lives that she's living, has been through the beacon, you know? Her soul absorbed by the beacon and put through to another. So perhaps by researching the root, the beacon itself, he hopes to find a way to cure his mother. Maybe that's his motive, or perhaps it's entirely selfish and just he wants knowledge and power because he's obsessed with finding out the secrets of the world. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to learn kind of more about what led Essek to be what he once was versus, you know, what we see him in the live play is a changed Essek from the character we're seeing now at the beginning of the animated show. What's more, while we're talking about Essek, let's talk about the Kryn Dynasty. In the D&D campaign, it was just one of maybe multiple 2 or 3 beacons, at least 2. I remember in the D&D campaign, the Dynasty had at least 1 more beacon. But it seems though in the animated show, they're speaking as if that was the only beacon that the Dynasty had. Essek says to the Bright Queen, "But my queen, without any beacon, our soldiers will die forever." So I'm pretty sure in the D&D campaign they had another beacon to continue. So this kind of elevates the drama of the Kryn not having any beacon at all, and that was the only one that they had. That raises the stakes big time, and I think is honestly a better adjustment, you know? Kind of took the edge off in a way and made it less dramatic when it was just one of their beacons stolen. Of course, still to them a reason for war, and to any society that function that way would be a reason for war, but with it being their only beacon, it really adds to their desperation, you know? But yeah, that's been going over all the major changes from the Critical Role Campaign 2 to the Mighty Nein animated. Did I miss any big ones? Be sure to let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video at all, please leave a like, critters. It helps me out, small channel, very much. I appreciate it so much. Yeah, and love you very much, and take care.